Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Charles Allen. I'm the Ward 6 Council Member and Chair of the Council's Committee on Transportation and the Environment. Today is Monday, March 31st, 2025, and we are meeting both in room 412 of the historic John A. Wilson Building and across the Zoom virtual platform. The time is now 1:13 p.m., and I'm calling to order this public hearing of the committee. Today, we will be considering two separate bills, Bill 26-65, which is the Solar Shade Expansion Amendment Act of 2025, and Bill 26-66, the Youth Advisory Council on Climate Change and Environmental Conservation Establishment Act of 2025. Bill 26-65, that's the Solar Shade Expansion Amendment Act of 2025, would require that the Department of Energy and Environment, or DOEE, identify suitable locations for solar canopy installation throughout the district. For some quick background, the summer of 2024, our last summer, was one of the hottest seasons recorded since 1880, narrowly beating heat records set just a year before in 2023. The scientific evidence is very clear. Human activity is the most significant driver of climate change. Burning fossil fuels emits greenhouse gases that then amplify the Earth's natural greenhouse effect, warming the planet at dangerous rates. In addition to its impact on climate, the burning of fossil fuels also has deleterious effects on air and water quality, which in turn impacts our human health. For its part, the district has planned to transition away from fossil fuels and toward clean, renewable energy. The district's renewable portfolio standard requires that 100% of the electricity sold in the city come from renewable sources by 2032, 5.5% of which must be solar. But there is a pressing need to both accelerate our progress toward that goal while also alleviating the impact of extreme weather, especially on our most vulnerable populations, including children. And let's just think about a practical application. You can ask any parent in DC about what it's like to take their kid to a playground between the months of May and September, and you're likely to get two answers. It's too hot and there's no shade. So much so, it makes some of our public spaces unusable for significant amounts of the year. Cities around the world use ideas like this to generate energy and generate shade, from playgrounds to riverwalk trails to parking lots and a lot more. Solar canopies are structures that elevate solar panels above the ground, both generating clean and renewable energy while providing much needed shade from the sun or shelter from the elements. And Bill 26-65 would spur the development of these structures throughout the district. Specifically, Bill 26-65 would require that DOEE publish a study on the feasibility of installing solar canopies at 20 sites across the district, including playgrounds, parks, sidewalks, bike lanes, and roads. The study would recommend specific locations where solar canopy installations should be piloted, and the district's capital improvement plan must include sufficient funding to install solar canopies at these locations. DOEE would then update its initial report to examine the success of the solar canopies at the piloted locations. And finally, beginning in 2030, the bill requires that each new capital project in the CIP include enough funding to support the installation of solar canopies where possible. The updated report would also discuss any financial incentives that could facilitate the installation of solar canopies, as well as any legal or regulatory barriers that could thwart new installations. After that, the committee is going to turn to Bill 26-66, the Youth Advisory Council on Climate Change and Environmental Conservation Establishment Act of 2025. The stated purpose of this bill is to establish a Youth Advisory Council on Climate Change and Environmental Conservation to provide an organized youth perspective on issues that impact climate change or the environment. The 17-member body would be tasked with working with DOEE, the Commission on Climate Change and Resiliency, the mayor, and the council to comment on laws, policies, and practices affecting the climate and the environment. The Youth Climate Council would also be empowered to make recommendations on environmental education and outdoor recreation programs. The bill recognizes the critical role that young people play in addressing the urgent challenges of climate change and environmental degradation. As the future steward of our planet, young people already have and will continue to inherit the consequences of our collective failure to mitigate the impacts of climate change, more so than any adult that's sitting in this room. Youth also bring their own perspectives and zeal in their advocacy. They have become the face of climate advocacy across the globe. Greta Thunberg has ignited a worldwide movement of environmental activism. Here in the US, young people in Montana obtained a landmark legal ruling in their state Supreme Court, which found that the state was violating its residents' constitutional right to a clean environment by permitting oil, gas, and coal projects without regard for global warming. These cases show that when empowered to advocate on their own behalf, young people have proven time and time again that they are capable and effective leaders. That's why I introduced this bill, to ensure that our climate action plans and strategies can be informed by the very youth who stand to gain, or lose, the most by our collective inaction. Today, youth voices remain underrepresented in formal decision-making spaces here in the district and across the country. Establishing this youth council is a simple step that we can take to recognize the power of intergenerational collaboration and empower those that most acutely are impacted by the long-term effects of climate change. And let me tell you, we have some passionate, energetic youth that are ready to roll up their sleeves and get to work. So I'm looking forward to today's discussion. The format for today's hearing is going to include public witnesses testifying on their own behalf. You have up to 3 minutes. Those testifying on behalf of an organization will have 5 minutes. If there are multiple witnesses testifying on behalf of the same organization, the first witness will have the first 5 minutes testified. Any other witnesses from the same organization will each have 3 minutes. We are using a timer to keep us all on schedule, so please keep an eye out for that. For witnesses that are testifying in person, when I call your name, please take a seat up at the table here when your name is called. For witnesses testifying virtually, you're going to receive a prompt via Zoom to accept a promotion to the panelist. And after finishing your testimony, please remain seated or on the Zoom so that we can ask you questions. Following that, we'll turn to our government witnesses. And for anyone interested in submitting testimony to the committee for the record, the committee will accept written testimony through the council's hearing management system at lims.dccouncil.gov/hearings. And our record closes on April 14th, 2025. So with that, let me go ahead and call all of our witnesses. We've got, again, a combo of folks that are in person and virtual. So I think that everybody who's in person will go ahead and be able to sit at the table, and I'll have the virtual panelists be here at the same time. So I have Jaron Hill Lockridge, who's a member of W8HC. I have Elsa Bohm, public witness. Ian Schlater, public witness. Katie Sullivan, public witness. Sophie Cesaris, if I mispronounced that, please correct me, a policy intern with Friends of the Earth. Jordan Salcido, Vice Chair and Commissioner of the Los Angeles County Youth Climate Commission. Peter Quinn Jacobs, the Executive Committee member with the Sierra Club DC. And Maureen Holman, Commissioner with the DC Commission on Climate Change and Resiliency. So I believe that we've got our 3 in-person witnesses. And we are bringing people on online. Okay. All right. I don't believe that Jaron Lockridge is here at the moment, but hopefully he can come back later. But Elsa Bohm, I have you up next. So Elsa, if you're ready, I'll turn to you for your testimony. And good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Chair Allen, DOE leaders, and everyone here today. My name is Elsa Boehm, and I'm 17 years old, a Ward 6 resident, and a student at Base DC High School. First of all, I want to thank everyone here who has worked on the Youth Climate Council bill. If you aren't already aware, I do in fact support it. So I want to take some time today to just call on this committee to consider the needs of youth across the district when it comes to the climate crisis and pass this bill. With rising water levels, heat waves, and increased flooding, we all know that climate change is making DC suffer. And as youth growing up in this world, my peers and I will continue to reap the consequences of today's decisions for years to come. Young people like myself are acutely aware of climate change, but often do not know what we can do to make a difference. Hearing from my classmates who go vegetarian and educate others and deeply care about our environment, but still don't feel like they have a way to civically engage is disheartening. And youth deserve a voice in the climate conversation and an outlet to make a difference. We have unique insight into issues that disproportionately impact us, and a Youth Climate Advisory Council would help us channel this insight into real solutions. The proposed Youth Climate Advisory Council is a body by youth for youth. Young people have actively helped build the idea of this Youth Climate Council every step of the way. We've seen successful precedent in C40 cities and in other youth advisory councils in DC, such as the Council on Health. Now is our own opportunity to create a precedent of listening to DC youth about climate change. By bringing young people from across different wards and perspectives and adults in government bodies together in dialogue, this council would both yield more inclusive policies and deeply contribute to a much-needed sense of mutual empowerment and unity. I've seen my peers inspired by the simple act of being able to raise their hand. I've seen how friends getting involved in political conversations has sparked their awareness and enthusiasm to create change. And when I read this bill, I see a piece of legislation that understands the need to institutionalize that spirit of inspiration, the need to empower youth in guiding forward our future. DC is made up of students who want to make a change. It's a school day hearing, so a lot of us actually couldn't make it today, but over the past months, young people have formed working groups, we've worked to brainstorm plans for the body, we've joined panels, and we're here today to urge you to take the final step necessary to create one. So we ask that you pass the Youth Advisory Council on Climate Change and Environmental Conservation Establishment Act, building on the deep power that already rests in this generation and giving it a vital outlet. We can teach youth that change is possible now. Thank you all for your time.
Thank you very much, Ms. Boehm. I appreciate that. And I appreciate you noted we scheduled it for the afternoon, but we know that we couldn't get it too far in the afternoon. So I know there's going to be some folks who couldn't, they're in class, so they couldn't be here. But I know we've heard from a lot of students. They're going to have their testimony for the record too. So I'm really grateful that you could be here. So hang tight for a few minutes while we have others testify, and I'm going to come back with some questions for you in just a moment. Next, let me turn to Ian Schlater.
Chair Allen, committee members, and staff, thank you for holding this hearing today. My name is Ian Schlater, and I'm a second year at American University studying public policy and environmental policy analysis. I'm speaking today in strong support with some reservations about the creation of the Youth Climate Council on Climate Change and Environmental Conservation. I'd like to note that while I am an intern for the Committee on Transportation and Environment, I'm here today sharing my own views and experiences, not speaking on behalf of the committee or my employer. While growing up in North Idaho, my high school was shut down yearly due to wildfire smoke. While attending college in DC, I've seen record-breaking weather and cold, delaying flights, closing schools, and creating dangerous conditions for our most vulnerable populations. The environment around us is changing, and its effects are already being felt. The choices that DC government makes today around the environment will shape the future my peers and I will be living in. We deserve a voice in these decisions. While in high school, I was the youngest member on the City of Moscow's Idaho Sustainable Environment Commission, a similar advisory board, but typically for adults. I was also on the Idaho Sierra Club's board of directors. Sitting on these boards as a youth member has helped guide decision-making and share a new perspective. Particularly, we were able to increase digital presence, prioritize diverse stakeholder views, modernize processes, and share how my peers and I feel about these policy decisions, critical things that I know the district needs. While I do support the Youth Climate Council, in the current bill text, there are some key elements that I disagree with. It states on lines 72 through 74, the college applicants must, quote, have been a district resident living outside a college dormitory for at least 2 years prior to their application to serve on the Youth Climate Council, end quote. Under this requirement, I would not be eligible. Many of my peers would not be eligible. Starting next year at American University, there will be a 2-year on-campus housing requirement for all students. And also many don't consider changing their residency to the district until maybe they graduate. Yet, we are extremely passionate about assisting DC's environmental goals and see a future living here after graduation. Under this requirement, most students would not be eligible and only begin to reach eligibility at the end of their senior year. Thus, they would not be in college. Chair Allen, I urge you to define residency differently or more precisely in the case of this bill. One idea would be to require proof of enrollment or housing at a university for a semester or a year. Please consider including the tens of thousands of passionate college students who, while not official residents, still value the district, believe in the district, and can bring a useful perspective and benefit the district's goals. Thank you for your time.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. All right, next, let me turn to Katie Sullivan. Ms. Sullivan, sorry to interrupt you. If you'll push the button so the red light comes on. There you go.
Apologies.
No, you're
Thank
good.
you.
You're good.
Oh, again. Dear Councilmember Allen and members of the Committee on Transportation and Environment, thank you so much for your presence here today. My name is Caitlin Sullivan, and I'm a student at Georgetown University studying government with a minor in environment and sustainability. I find myself here today as a product of growing up in the generation plagued with the pressure of a ticking time clock. We are constantly told that we have our work cut out for us when we inherit this world, though it's always framed as a futuristic issue. In recent years, I've dedicated much of my time to searching for creative ways to get involved in fostering climate stability and turn back the clock. My primary involvement being with organizations such as the New Roots Institute, where I've partaken in and run campaigns that help to lessen the exacerbating effect that factory farming has on environmental degradation. More recently, I've been fortunate enough to get involved with this work on a legislative level through hearings such as these. Though I'm extremely fond of Chicago, which is where I was born and raised, what I'm doing here today is why I moved to DC. My personal belief, which I'm assuming is shared by many of you in this room, is that some of the most meaningful, wide-reaching change is achieved at the legislative level. There's no city better equipped for this kind of change than the heart of the United States. This issue is not one that we can afford to address in the future, My presence alongside the others testifying here today is evidence that younger generations are ready and willing to contribute to legislative change immediately if given the chance. Young women like Greta Thunberg have fought to make their voices heard, but we lack the official capacity to sway policy. This leads to an underrepresentation of the voices who have some of the highest stake in environmental harm. If we were to establish a youth advisory council, there would be no shortage of applicants desiring to get involved and foster change. This would be well worth the effort, as establishing a commission of tenacious young adults will ensure that this committee yields tangible results rather than merely creating the appearance of action. In our lifetime, we will eventually have to face the consequences of climate change, and with each passing year, those consequences intensify. I have the absolute honor and pleasure of constantly being surrounded by passionate, determined individuals at school. And if I've learned anything in my short time at Georgetown, it's that a small group with such ambition can move mountains. Younger generations have the extremely high stakes in this issue, as it is us who will be responsible for repairing the damage eventually. We accept this challenge willingly with high hopes of inspiring change, but we must be given a platform to do so. I'm absolutely confident that establishing a youth advisory council on climate change and environmental conservation will yield extremely positive legislative change. Having a designated setting where passionate, determined youth voices can be included in legislation will help to guarantee that this generation will inherit a government that has begun to tackle this issue. That way, when it comes our time to officially call the shots, we are working in spaces we have helped to mold, which are reflective of what we believe to be the most responsible, conscientious, creative steps towards climate stability. Thank you again for your time and consideration, and apologies for my voice.
No problem at all. Excellent job, and thank you very much. I appreciate it. Next, let me turn to Sophie Cesaris, and if I mispronounced that, please correct me.
Dear Councilman Allen and representatives from the Committee on Transportation and the Environment, my name is Sophie Cazares, and I'm testifying in support of Bill 2666, which would establish the Youth Advisory Council on Climate Change and the Environment. I'm a resident of Ward 3 and speak today on behalf of Friends of the Earth, as well as several student-run organizations at American University, including Plant Futures and an animal welfare group. I am also a proud member of Gen Z. Climate anxiety is a prevalent and growing concern among my peers. A 2021 study found that approximately 60% of respondents aged 18 to 25 felt very or extremely worried about climate change, and over 45% reported that these feelings negatively impact their daily lives. The widespread sense of hopelessness, coupled with the perceived lack of governmental action, exacerbates this anxiety. My generation feels that policymakers have abandoned us, neglected to take decisive action on the climate crisis that will impact us the most. I personally have felt this way on many occasions, which is why I've committed my education and early career to advocating for climate action. However, we, the youth, do not simply want to be heard, we want to be included in the decision-making process. Too often, we are dismissed or overlooked. Bill 2666, introduced by Councilman Allen, is a critical step in addressing this by giving us a real substantive seat at the table, a seat that we have long been asking for. This bill not only provides us with an opportunity to have our voices heard, but also empowers us to create meaningful change here in Washington, D.C. As a leader in environmental organizations such as Sunrise, Plant Futures, and the Animal Rights Coalition, I can attest to the frustration and urgency that my peers feel. We are eager to push for systemic changes, such as moving away from a fossil fuel-based economy, while also taking action on a personal level, such as switching our diets to be more plant-based to reduce our environmental impact. A February 2025 report from Faunalytics found that Gen Z often attributes environmental problems to individual behaviors rather than systemic factors. While it is vital for us to address personal actions, we need the tools and platforms, such as the Youth Advisory Council that this bill would provide, to expand our efforts and work collaboratively on a larger scale. There are several critical issues that I believe the Youth Advisory Council could address. In my work on food systems, I have seen how important and often overlooked this aspect of climate conversation can be. I could see that being a key discussion for the Youth Council as a tool to speak up for more sustainable food that has co-benefits for public health and food justice in the district. The Faunalytics report also highlights how financial barriers and societal factors, such as lack of education and awareness, prevent many young people from fully engaging with environmental issues. By tackling these barriers, the Youth Advisory Council could empower Gen Z to take proactive, informed action. Beyond environmental advocacy, creating a space for youth voices on the Youth Advisory Council is an investment in the future of effective policymaking. By involving young people in the process today, you are helping to shape future leaders who will one day take your seat at the table. Together, we can address the most pressing challenges facing our city and the planet, challenges that will define our generation and those to come. I urge you to support Bill 2666 and consider the lasting impact this council will have not only on our city's environmental future, but on the civic engagement of an entire generation. We are ready, willing, and able to collaborate with you to build a better, more sustainable future. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you very much. Next, let me turn to Commissioner Salcido.
Good afternoon. My name is Jordan Salcido. I'm a commissioner and vice chair for the LA County Youth Climate Commission, and I'm joining today to share my experience with the commission, as well as share my excitement for the potential Youth Advisory Council on Climate Change and Environmental Conservation Establishment Act of 2025. I've been a part of the commission since the beginning and have had the great pleasure in witnessing its success and building of momentum for youth climate action across LA County. The commission is comprised of 25 commissioners with 5 members elected from each of our 5 districts, bringing our own lived experiences, expertise in our own community, and network of connections to this work. We began our journey with a countywide survey, hearing directly from young people on the many ways in which climate impacts their well-being, mental health, family, finances, and visions for the future. They shared stories of fainting at their local park on a hot day, feeling sick from the poor air quality, living within a web of freeways, and what it's like to live with polluting industries as your neighbor. After collecting surveys from nearly 2,000 young people, its results showed that clean air ranked as a top priority across all districts, followed by green spaces and green buildings. But what do we mean when we say clean air and green buildings? Each neighborhood within each district is very different with their own set of needs and desires. We established district coalition meetings to dig deeper and find out more about the specifics of each community. District coalition meetings are monthly sessions held to discuss local issues, learn from local leaders, connect with other passionate individuals, and a space for visioning for the thriving futures we'd like to see. Everything that we're learning and hearing and building in these meetings is brought back to the Board of County Supervisors' offices, and we've had the opportunity as a commission to present to the board's meeting and give updates on the findings of our surveys. And recently, our Legislative Ad Hoc Committee got the board's support of Senator Butler's Youth Climate Leadership Act of 2024. And here we are in Washington, D.C., with the potential establishment of a Youth Climate Council. Also want to give a shout out to our chair, Kevin Patel, who's been a fierce leader in creating this space and for being the driving force for the commission to come to life and has been a young leader for many years now. Together in creating a space for young people to dream, build, imagine, and actualize their visions for their communities, we've seen the incredible amount of ingenuity and creativity young people possess to shape their environment. We need local governments to support this by building the infrastructure, setting the table, and establishing the councils and commissions for young people to lead. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, and very much appreciate you joining us from LA. So if you're able to hang in there for a second, I'm gonna have some questions for you in just a moment. Next, let me turn to Peter Quinn Jacobs.
Hello. My name is Peter Quinn Jacobs. I'm an educator. I live in Ward 3, and I volunteer with Sierra Club DC, and I'm on Sierra Club DC's executive committee. The Sierra Club is America's largest grassroots environmental organization with millions of members and supporters, and in DC, we have about 2,100 dues-paying members and many thousands of additional supporters, including some high school students who I've had the pleasure of working with over the last year. So I help run our high school program, which we call our Climate Leadership Program, which is a 6-month-long experiential skill building program that tries to convert general interest in the environment into practical action in the district. So some of this year's cohort of 10 high school students have submitted their own testimony about the bill today, and they can tell you better than I can why they want youth to be more involved in climate-related decision-making. So I'll leave that to them. Instead, I'd like to offer my perspective as somebody who was once in their shoes. I first heard about climate change when I was 13, and I immediately wanted to help. And luckily for me, I had teachers and parents who were happy to give me opportunities to become more engaged. And as a teen, I learned how to testify in front of a city council like this one, how to organize events, and how to talk to strangers about important issues. And it's because of those experiences that I am as involved as I am today. And I hope that the proposed Youth Advisory Council becomes a path toward that sort of engagement for the next generation of environmental change makers in our community. Sierra Club DC strongly supports the establishment of a Youth Advisory Council on Climate Change, but we believe that some changes should be made to ensure that its educational value for members and its effectiveness as an advisory body are maintained. So first, on equipping members to succeed, for its Youth Advisory Council to be effective, DC must prioritize training its members on topics like the environmental policy landscape, political processes, and budgetary frameworks within the district. Without this foundational knowledge, young participants may struggle to make meaningful contributions through their advisory role to this council and to the mayor. Imagining my 15-year-old self trying to fill in this role, I'm pretty sure that I would have found it difficult to keep up with all the different things that you need to keep up with in order to have an informed opinion on these issues. The legislative and budget processes in the district are complex, requiring both education and practical experience to understand, and especially given that one purpose of this legislation is to include youth from marginalized communities, we cannot and should not assume that members will possess a base level of knowledge about district government. So the district should equip members of the Advisory Council to succeed through trainings and workshops. And as proposed, the legislation would require the Youth Advisory Council to meet once per quarter. And while this is phrased in the legislation as a minimum number of meetings, we believe that minimum should be much higher. 4 meetings a year will not meet the bare minimum requirements for a body like the Youth Advisory Council to be effective at advising on issues related to climate change. So we recommend increasing the frequency of the Youth Advisory Council's meetings, keeping in mind the City Council's legislative calendar and the city's budget process. Convening additional meetings around important dates will ensure that the council can be more apprised of legislative and budgetary developments related to local climate action. I would also emphasize again that for young members who are still learning how to navigate complex political and environmental issues, 4 meetings per year will not be sufficient for them to fulfill their duties as members of the Youth Advisory Council or for their own learning objectives. And then finally, we also believe that helpful environmental action requires collaboration and input from stakeholders, whether those are environmental organizations, community groups, or government agencies. So in addition to its quarterly meetings, we believe that the Youth Advisory Council should plan regular meetings to discuss relevant issues and gather input from local partners. Stakeholder discussions should be treated as an essential part of the educational experience for members. And this approach aligns with the value of intergenerational collaboration and ensures dialogue between the youth members and the broader community. So to sum up, at Sierra Club, we believe that the Youth Advisory Council has the potential to make a meaningful difference in DC's climate action efforts. And to realize that potential, it's crucial that this body prioritizes training and stakeholder engagement while meeting with enough frequency to ensure that its members are well prepared to achieve their goals. Thank you for introducing this legislation and for the opportunity to testify. Together, we can ensure that DC becomes a model for other cities that wish to involve youth in long-term decision-making around climate change.
Thank you very much. And last on our public witnesses, let me turn to Maureen Holman, who's a commissioner with the DC Commission on Climate Change and Resiliency. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much. Good afternoon, Committee Chair Allen and members of the Committee on Transportation and the Environment. My name is Maureen Holman, and it is my honor to serve as a commissioner on the District of Columbia Commission on Climate Change and Resiliency. I am here today to provide support and a few recommendations on the Youth Advisory Council on Climate Change and Environmental Conservation Establishment Act of 2025. Briefly about the Commission on Climate Change and Resiliency is an independent body charged to assess the district's actions to mitigate and adapt to climate change. Through quarterly meetings, the Commission reviews plans, policies, and programs and advises the mayor and council. The Commission champions climate actions which serve residents in a just and equitable manner, protect infrastructure, and advance our economy and quality of life in the nation's capital. The commission held a knowledge forum and exchange on January 25th, 2025, which was well attended by various stakeholders and public officials. The event served as a research component for the commission's third legislatively mandated report to the mayor and council, scheduled to be released this October. We sought to take stock of existing knowledge related to climate change in the district, strengthen community networks, and generate forward-looking ideas. The agenda exclusively focused on the District of Columbia and the past, present, and future of how climate change impacts people and organizations in our city. We heard directly from citizens, researchers, organizations, and agencies, and featured a panel entitled Being Heard, the Voice of Youth, where some very impressive young people, including one or two who have testified today, gave their perspective on the challenges they face as they look to the future with a changing climate. In 2023, the Commission requested staff and resources to support the creation of a DC Youth Climate Council, modeled on similar efforts in Los Angeles, London, Medellin, and many others around the world. We thought this new climate council could facilitate the political empowerment and engagement of young climate leaders in local policymaking while filling a gap left by the now defunct Youth Advisory Council. The current legislation to establish a new Youth Advisory Council on climate change and environmental conservation would go far in supporting the district's progressive climate agenda. This act would build a critical bridge between youth leaders, local government officials, and other critical stakeholders to help drive ambitious climate action, raise awareness, and engage city residents on climate solutions. As a commissioner, I would welcome the opportunity to continuously engage and know, based on hearing just one panel at our knowledge forum, that the future is indeed bright with these great young minds bringing their skills and experiences to the Youth Council. That being said, there are a few adjustments that I would ask the committee to consider as the act moves forward to a final vote. First, I would consider expanding the purpose of the Youth Council beyond the stated, quote, create and sustain environmental educational opportunities for youth, and specifically call out workforce development. As the Commission has testified in other hearings, there is a great opportunity to mitigate and adapt to climate change while generating quality local green jobs, and the Youth Council's educational opportunities should include apprenticeships, certificates, and other programs that provide a direct link to workforce development. 2, the tasks and responsibilities of the Youth Council should be called out with more specificity and linked to agencies with a direct impact on youth in the district. Some suggestions include DCPS, the DCPS Public Charter Schools, OSSI, report cards on climate change and resiliency issues as identified by the youth themselves. Examples include leveraging facilities data on how the HVAC is working and related air quality monitoring, tracking recycling or composting operations, availability of baseline curriculum, resources and equipment to learn about climate, availability of safe transit options around campus, tree coverage, fresh food, etc. The Department of Parks and Recreation and our public libraries could get some recommendations for improvements of cooling centers, spray parks, and pools during heat emergencies, both the facilities themselves and adjacent activities, how to better engage the youth to stay cool, safe, and occupied in the district once the summer hits, or maybe now, seeing as how the temperature is today. And the Office of the Chief Financial Officer, the DC budget, can be used to build a circular economy and improve sustainability and resiliency in the district. The Youth Council could develop reports and graphics on the percentage of capital improvement funding which serves the climate agenda and where there could be better improvements in the future or better investments in the future. In terms of membership, it seems too broad as currently drafted. And with all due respect to the wonderful voices sitting here at this table, the Youth Council should be limited to high school students, preferably those that can be compensated through school credits or other subsidies for their time and effort. A shadow or junior council program for middle schoolers who will need to know how the council functions and could also be used for those younger people who demonstrated interest could be created. In addition to the geographical and equitable considerations for youth membership, the Act should also include a requirement that there is at least one representative member designated from a DCPS school, a DCPS charter school, and a private school within DC, as all will have students with very different perspectives, curriculums, and operational facilities. Lastly, there should be language added that requires the Youth Council to provide updates and/or seek counsel as needed from the Commission on Climate Change and Resiliency at our commission's quarterly meetings. There should be a direct formal link between these two bodies as they serve to help advance the District of Columbia's ambitious climate goals and provide feedback to the mayor and council with support from the Department of Energy and Environment. Thank you for this opportunity to testify in support of the creation of the Youth Advisory Council on Climate Change and Environmental Conservation, and I look forward to responding to any questions you may have.
Excellent. Thank you all very much for your testimony. I really appreciate it. Let me try to work my way through a few questions that we have. And this is, your feedback has been exactly what we're hoping for. Support of the bill, but coming with sets of recommendations of how to try to get it to the right spot for its final landing spot. Let me begin. Ms. Boehm, I might start with you. So you are 17 and in high school right now, correct?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay. So one of the things that we're looking at least as drafted, was trying to think through how do we have a diversity of age, experience, and perspectives that could be added here. And the way that we crafted this was, again, for purposes of introduction, 3 middle school, 3 high school, 3 college or university. Now, if I ask my 7th grade daughter, she absolutely believes that there are middle school students who are capable to sit on a body and provide good feedback. I would say my experience mirrors that as well. While I might see more high schoolers fit that criteria, I also feel like there are middle schoolers that do. Would welcome your thoughts on that. I mean, I went, when we were debating this bill, I even asked my staff, should we even go to elementary? And we decided no, but we went with middle school and high school. But not being that far removed from middle school, what are your thoughts about whether we should explicitly include middle school students?
Yeah, so I actually have a sister in middle school and I was talking with her about this. And I think if there's a middle schooler who is going to be proactive enough to take on that responsibility and join the committee and discuss, I think that's probably a person who is mature enough to be able to speak on this issue, and be able to have some sort of like original perspective. I do think I agree that there definitely would be like probably more high schoolers, more college students, who are at that level and who are willing to engage. But I think there are definitely middle schoolers who would be able to be involved. And on top of that, I think you don't have to have like everybody in the same room discussing the same subjects. Like it's possible for there occasionally to be like working groups where middle schoolers could maybe focus a little more intensively on like being educated on the issues they're discussing and then come into discussions. So I think part of that would just be making sure there were appropriate like educational resources to give people a background on the issues they're discussing.
Yeah. Okay, that's helpful. Mr. Schlater, I'm going to focus for a second on the composition of this entity. I appreciated your testimony. I think, and this is why we wrestle with this in the hearing. So the intent behind the bill was when we talked about college or university students being a DC resident living outside of a college dorm for at least 2 years. I think you accurately point out that's going to limit a lot of people. So we probably need to make a change to that. But I do think the intent behind it was to say, how do we make sure we have people, if we're creating a DC commission, you have folks who are going to be, or at least aspire to be, a district resident. I think I heard you say one suggestion might be either complete 1 semester or 1 year. I guess if I complete 1 year, I'd probably feel comfortable with somebody who's finished their first year here, because there's an increased likelihood they've at least gotten to know the city a little bit. And I'm talking in this example, someone who's come from outside the city to go to college or university here. From a dormitory perspective, I think you raised a really good point. I'm going to have different schools are going to have different requirements about either on-campus living or off-campus living. So perhaps more of a after 1 year, then regardless of if you live on campus or off campus, would work. Does that would that sound more reasonable to where your recommendation is?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Chair Allen. I think that the dormitory requirement of 2 years and also residency
Mhm.
is a big ask for folks. I'm not a resident yet. And so I think that having the residency defined as 1 year enrollment in college, maybe, or on-campus housing or some proof of on-campus housing would be a way to show
Mhm.
that the individual has experienced DC, knows DC, and could provide their guidance. And I think that despite them not being a resident officially of DC, they still provide a very interesting perspective. I provide stuff from back home that maybe could be beneficial and useful here. And I think that folks across the US that come here see DC as such an amazing and innovative city, that stuff can actually happen and get stuff done. And I think that we really do want to provide that
Mhm.
experience to you all.
All right, that's helpful. Katie, let me ask you, since you're not at American University, but at Georgetown University, you didn't speak to this issue necessarily, but now that we've talked about it a little bit, do you have any similar concerns that we actually unintentionally be limiting our pool to a very small number of people? So we need to think about how to expand that?
Yeah, Georgetown is actually kind of interesting because I'm required to live on campus for 3 years. So I actually wouldn't be able to partake in the committee, nor would anyone from Georgetown University. I would say, just for like specificity purposes, I don't know, do we want to say like an actual annual like year or a school year? You know, because I feel like that distinction could be important because like I would have lived here for a year, like in like 6 months from now-ish. So, I mean, I don't know that it makes a huge difference, but I do think that like a sophomore in college who's lived here for a year, I do feel that like I've personally really tried to get a feel for the city, and like
Yeah.
a lot of my peers have as well. And also, I would say that like because I can totally understand the concern of like not wanting to put people on a committee where like it in a city where like they haven't really like grown up or experienced the area. Um, I would say that like that should be part of like the application process, and like that should be part of like the training. Like if you guys can tell in some sort of application that this person is just like extremely passionate about this city and they seem to know what's going on, then I
Mhm.
think that that is perfectly acceptable. But I definitely agree that there should be some consideration for those who might not be very familiar.
Got it. All right, that's helpful. I appreciate it. And definitely an area where we're going to go back and make some changes to. Let me ask, I'm going to ask this to Elsa, Ian, and Katie to start with. One of my concerns whenever we create a task force is how do you make it so it's actually taken seriously? How do you make it so it's impactful? So part of what we did in crafting this was trying to make it so that the district itself was required to do different things. So, for example, Department of Energy and Environment shall provide, not may, shall provide principal staff and equipment support for the activities of the Youth Climate Council. We say that the chair of the committee with jurisdiction here in the council shall provide an opportunity for the Youth Climate Council to report in person its findings and recommendations at least once a year. The Youth Climate Council may use space and supplies owned or rented by the district government for purposes consistent with this chapter. So we try to put language in here to make it so that you actually weren't just in name, but you actually had some meat behind, empowered to do the work. And I know we've gotten some good feedback today about how do we actually make that happen. We'll be curious from your perspective. I don't want to waste your time. How do you make it where it's actually meaningful? You feel like your voice is actually heard. You have a seat at the table. You're not kind of just, on the edges of a conversation, but I want this youth council to actually mean something and be able to contribute. Are there any other ideas you feel like would help make it so that it's taken seriously, that your voices are taken seriously? I'm going to turn to, in just a moment, to our commissioner from Los Angeles, because I want to hear from their perspective how that's also works, so that you actually translate not something that's isn't that nice, but actually something meaningful, right? How do you feel about the way it's been constructed so far? Ms. Bohm, I see your hand up.
Yeah. So I think I really like the requirement to testify at least once a year at DC City Council. I think a huge part of the legitimacy of the Youth Council would be its ability to connect and engage with existing government bodies. So I think even maybe I like the once a year, but it's also possible to maybe have that be twice a year, or maybe we're also like presenting our findings to the Commission on Climate Change and Resiliency, or some sort of like established consistent engagement with existing adult bodies. I also think a big part of legitimacy is kind of getting the mandate of all youth in the city. And that means that we should focus on like diversity when recruiting the people to be on the council in the first place. So if like all of the members are coming from one school, or I guess like some sort of like high income parts of the city, then that's not as conducive to the council's legitimacy as actively recruiting people from maybe lower income schools or communities, and taking the time to do that outreach, and make sure that everybody has a voice.
Those are great ideas. The panel here?
Yeah, if I may, I also think that like the aforementioned trainings could really serve as like a sort of basis for the legitimacy of this. And also, I know that like we were talking about like what ages would be appropriate to include in this conversation. And I think the diversity of ages is sort of able to like show the like progression of like, because I feel like we're talking about it more and more in school, like climate change. I personally learned about it in school in like sixth grade, but then like my understandings have sort of like developed. So I do, and like my confidence in terms of like public speaking, and I feel the need, or not need, but I feel more comfortable expressing my opinions in a group full of adults, which can absolutely be intimidating. So I think this diversity of like ages will not only like teach younger students to be able to do so at an earlier age, but also like help to make sure that there are some voices that are on this committee that are able to like sort of, and that's also part of the application, should be part of the application process, like in ensuring that we're meeting these people in person, and we're sure that they have this like sort of confidence. And I know, I personally know a lot of kids around my age and even younger that really do have this. So I do think that that could add to the legitimacy and being taken seriously.
That's great. Thank you. Mr. Slater?
I second that totally. I think that the diverse like age brackets of students that'll be on this commission will hopefully be able to educate each other about what's happening in their middle schools and in their high schools with like the cafeteria situation, and maybe college students have a different perspective that has like this large green space on campuses. So I think that all of these different students will provide different experiences, and that will be great. I think another way to increase the like legitimacy and agency of this commission is to have the commission provide reports on legislation that is proposed to the council, and to have the chair of the committee take into account that report. I think that maybe youth folks will be able to catch on to some other things that maybe adults in the room aren't as privy to or have different considerations. So I think that having, maybe it's not in the legislation, maybe it is, but having some sort of report that is drafted by the commission during legislative time periods would be beneficial for students to give their input in a more formal recommendation way.
Yeah, okay, that's helpful too. And I'm going to come back in a moment because Commissioner Holman kind of outlined a whole set of specifics that I want to kind of get into in a little bit. So I'm going to turn to our commissioner from LA. Just want to get that perspective on that legitimacy and agency that you've experienced in Los Angeles, and either places where it's gone really well or places where it hasn't gone well that we should be kind of keeping an eye out for and how we structure this. So kind of similar question to the commissioner.
Sure, thank you. Yeah, some things that come to mind for me is really the distinction between being youth-led and government-supported. So having the youth really be the ones leading and directing the conversations or the direction that we go, but having that all be backed and supported by the structure of the commission, or the structure of, we're connecting you to local community-based organizations. We're helping you build those connections in your network. We're also, talking a lot about workforce, and, you're getting to meet and hear from folks who are in these roles and learn what that's like, and have conversations with them and get to know them. I think also centering the voices of young people and sharing their stories and their experiences, pulling, when we're doing something like this, we're sharing quotes, or we are, inviting them to share in our newsletter, and really uplifting and centering young people's voices and allowing them to share I think that's leading with the idea that you are the expert. And so even though we are, maybe a certain age or whatever it may be, our experience is our expertise, and we are the experts of our own experience. And so really leading with that, I think, has helped, have that idea that we're legitimate and voices worthy of being part of the conversations and at the table.
Yeah. All right. That's really helpful. I love your phrasing of youth-led and government-supported. So in that regard, obviously, let's acknowledge both adults and young people are very busy, have many, many obligations. For a young person who might be on this body or the one in Los Angeles, who have everything from classes, exams, extracurriculars, are there any specific ways you'd highlight that Los Angeles has supported those young people, recognizing they may have less flexibility than adults have in a workplace, for example, to take an hour off or do different things? Are there different ways that you would recommend us keep an eye on how we truly actually are government supporting of a youth-led council?
Sure. Yeah. I think one thing was definitely compensation. The commission is comprised of members who are over 18. And so that's just something that needed to be done in order to compensate commissioners. I know that there was a youth council for LA City, and that welcomes members under the age of 18, but therefore they couldn't be compensated. So yeah, I think the commission, took the valued compensation and so decided to make it over 18. And I know someone mentioned earlier too, like, the timing of things. What's going to be the most accessible? Is it better to have things after school hours or on weekends? That's typically when we're having our events and programs. We're also trying to just reduce the barrier overall and just have these things at schools or at parks and at places where people already are and young people are already spending their time, and kind of making it a part of their life in places they're already at. And yeah, I think we're still learning. I think there's a lot to learn. And I think the biggest thing is just to listen and ask those questions, because I think it's going to be different for every community and every, person's situation, but just asking those questions and being open to hearing what can reduce the barrier and what can make it more easily accessible for folks to participate.
That's helpful. And have you found, you said you have a 25-member body. Do you feel it's unwieldy? Do you feel it's not enough? You'd go to 50? How do you feel about the size? Our proposal is for 17 members. I recognize there's no perfect number. It's more about kind of what do you find is about the right size of representation? You can actually get things done. What have you found with 25?
Yeah, 25. I think it's also fluctuated, as we've had terms that are ending and new folks onboarding. It's always been around 25, but there's definitely times when we've been a little under that number. And it honestly feels a little over that number sometimes as well when you consider the folks that we're working with who maybe don't have a seat on the commission, but are still really engaged with us and really supporting and leading the direction of our work. And so, yeah, I think 25 feels good. I think that having 5 per each of the 5 districts has felt nice, and we're all located in different areas within the district. So it's been nice to kind of get a kind of feel for what's happening in each of these places. And yeah, just considering our wider network as far as what we're bringing and pulling into our scope of work, it's definitely, more than the 25 folks that are sitting on the commission. And yeah, I think that there's that's probably another place where we're still learning too, is that the right number and what makes the most sense. So yeah.
Got it. Okay. Ms. Cazares, I wanted to pull you into the conversation too. In regard to the conversation that we've had around agency, legitimacy, any thoughts you have from your perspective about making sure, and anything you reflect on that you've heard around how we make sure this entity actually is able to achieve that?
Yeah, I think that it's useful to have the youth also a part of the decision-making process. So somehow being involved with the not just like advising and talking about it, but actually like learning how the policy is written, like learning how they can take that next step and have more of a say in how the policy is written. I think that would be really educational for them, but also have them more hands-on.
Yep, got it. I know that Mr. Quinn Jacobs seemed to have dropped off. I did want to address one thing that he had talked about, which was the legislation sets a floor of 4 meetings per year. It doesn't require or limit to 4. And that actually mirrors our climate change resiliency, which is it sets a floor of 4. The commission or the council can obviously meet once a month, every 2 weeks if they wanted to. But oftentimes in legislation, we set a floor to say you can't meet less than 4 times a year, so every quarter. And oftentimes entities will meet more frequently than that, but we oftentimes set the floor. So I probably won't change that because we wanted to align that with the commission itself as well. But I did want to get, if I can, Commissioner Holman, into some of your testimony. I don't disagree with anything you kind of outlined, right? I sometimes hit a bit of a philosophical, and you're no stranger to the legislative world too. Oftentimes I find when we start lining up within the legislation, do this, do this, do this, do this, that can sometimes be viewed as you're only allowed to do these things. And we were trying to craft it in a way that actually was very permissive to kind of hit a couple of highlights, basically, and then really let the commission or the youth council kind of take where it wants to go from there. So I don't disagree with any of the recommendations you had about kind of the different topic areas. You're 1,000% correct. Those are a lot of the spaces we'd want a youth council to hit on. I need to wrestle a little bit, and I'm kind of curious of what your thoughts are on this, of how sometimes legislation can be overly prescriptive in a way that almost becomes limiting, but I also don't want to be so non-prescriptive that the youth council's not quite sure, should we go into that space, or do we have the authority to go into that? So it's a bit of a balancing act, but wanted to kind of get your take on that.
I can appreciate that, especially when something is put in law and then, the agency itself might change, or, other things might change. So there needs to be some flexibility there, especially when we're going to be dealing with young people and a council that might be changing, fairly frequently with 2 or potentially 3-year terms. My thought is, if there is reticence to be so specific in terms of the specific agency, then, and maybe kind of hearing what some of the other conversation was here today, maybe there can be specific points in time or specific tasks related to, say, the budget development process. Because I think that while we can have a lot of great conversation about a lot of different, aesthetics and projects and programs and things like this, it does come down to the money. And I think that teaching, to echo some of the other comments, teaching and training sort of what that process is and how they can influence and where they can influence, I think is going to be key. And so if there is a way to maybe more specifically call out, whether it be budget review or a workforce development or something as it relates to some of the larger pieces of the climate world. There's also no reference in there to any of the specific district's climate plans. And so maybe there's a place where there can be some specificity there in terms of having some specific consult, whether it be the next ready, climate ready DC plan or whatever that next sustainability plan might be. But I think part of where I was coming from was also putting on an old hat, having worked at the Department of Energy and Environment, it can put a little bit too much of a burden on that agency when they're the only agency that's mentioned, I think, sometimes in bills. So it is that gray area where you don't want to be too specific, but you want to have enough specificity where it gives the council some legitimate authority, so that if they do start asking questions or if they expect some responses, whether it be from committee staffers or from agency members, that they can get those questions answered.
Yeah. All right, that's helpful. Part of what I'm taking is we need to add greater specificity. I'm going to wrestle a little bit with to what degree, just so that we don't lead the council in a way that it feels constrained, but also that it does feel empowered. So you've given us a lot to chew on there. So we'll work on that. I know that I want to kind of understand a little bit of your recommendation. Not that we like to have any conflict here on the dais, but in terms of your recommendation was not to have middle school age. I think you actually had a little twist on it, was to do more like a junior commissioner. Can you just explain a little bit more about your thoughts on that one?
when considering sort of the membership and the commitment that's going to be, hopefully coming from the members, and probably more than quarterly, and, who knows what they might be working on once, a few years passed and the council really gets going. I think one of the considerations that I and the commission were taking into account was, where can voices be heard? And so the amazing college students that are next to me are, for the most part, over the age of 18. And so they have a different way to involve themselves in the legislative process, maybe not here in the district, again, depending on your residency, but there's a different way in which an 18-year-old can involve themselves in the legislative process and in sort of the things that go on in their local government. And so we were really focused on, how can we capture this group that does not have a voice at all, and how can we really empower them and build them up and try to maintain enough engagement where they have authority and they have power, but they're not so overwhelmed, as you referenced, with, exams and school and extracurriculars and other activities, that they don't get anything done. Listening to some of the comments here today and reflecting on how I referenced sort of some of the middle schoolers, I think that there could be, especially on the training and education side, almost a cascading of sort of information. A lot of the information that might be coming from non-resident but district college students could be incredibly valuable, because it gives an entirely different perspective that you wouldn't have if you'd grown up here in the DMV, or in the Mid-Atlantic. Whereas, I think that there can be different ways to structure that, again, to empower some of those students who don't have a voice, to learn from some of those students on colleges that do have more of a voice, and can maybe create, again, mentorships or some sort of a cascade that way.
Mhm.
But that was really the thought, not to disparage anybody. It's doing great work at the local universities, but just to figure out how people that are really in the weeds on what the district's doing and how they're spending their parks and rec money, or how they're spending their schools money, and how we can best empower them.
Got it. Okay, that's helpful. And then you also had suggested, and it certainly it's a goal. We didn't explicitly lay it out, that you'd have youth representatives that are coming from DCPS or from chartered or from private schools. The goal would be certainly that we have young people that are reflective of different educational experiences. Because this wasn't a school-based council, we just hadn't structured it as one from DCPS, one from a chartered, one from private schools. And so I'm going to wrestle with that a little bit, because I agree, again, with the intent is that there could be a benefit by having somebody who comes from a DCPS background and what that curriculum looks like in their classroom, the conversations happening there, what's happening in a charter school, what's happening in a private school. It may be very similar, it may be very different. But because we hadn't structured this as a school-based council, we just didn't name explicitly school sectors. But I think the intent is still the same. So we'll kind of think through what that could look like.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
As the parent of a charter school kid, there are some weird sort of distinctions that can occur, not just based on the school year calendar, but other things as well. And I think even if that's something that could be listed as a preference, or just something sort of highlighted in that manner, that could be very effective.
Yeah, or it could be making sure that within the review process of applications, we don't have to necessarily explicitly say, I want one person representing this, one representing this, one representing this. We also state, though, I don't want to have everybody coming from one sector. So it spreads out. And obviously, because schools are different, I'm going to have charter schools that have fifth graders, and they call that middle school. And so I don't think the fifth grader is who we're looking for on this if I didn't have elementary school from DCPS. So the parity of that, which maybe means we actually need to put like an age on here. So we'll think about that. Anyway, lots to chew on and lots of really good feedback on this. I don't have any further questions at this point. I want to thank everybody for your testimony, for your ideas and recommendations. It's incredibly helpful for us as we kind of fine tune this and then get it ready to move forward towards a vote. So again, my appreciation. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
And thank you to our witnesses on Zoom as well. All right, with that, we're going to move to our government witnesses. So we have Richard Jackson, who is the Director of the Department of Energy and Environment, and Jen Croft, who's the Associate Director of Sustainability and Energy Management Division within DGS. And good afternoon to you both. And I know you both feel inspired, just like me, after hearing so many of our young people testify. All right, and our committee rules are, I have to swear you in. Then after that, I'm going to turn it over to you for your testimony, and then we'll turn to some questions after that. So if you will, please raise your right hand. Committee Rule 603 requires that government witnesses testify under oath or affirmation. So do you swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that the testimony you give to the Committee on Transportation and the Environment is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Excellent. Thank you all very much. I don't know if you flipped a coin or who goes first, but Director Jackson, Ms. Croft? All right.
Thank you. And good afternoon, Councilmember Allen, fellow members of the Committee on Transportation and Environment, members of the public, and our sister agencies who are here today. My name is Jen Croft, Associate Director for the Sustainability and Energy Division at the Department of General Services. I'm here today to testify on behalf of DGS regarding the Solar Shade Expansion Amendment Act of 2025. The mission of DGS is to build, maintain, and sustain the nearly 1,000 buildings and properties owned and leased by the district. The Sustainability and Energy Division manages the district government's utilities and oversees projects and programs to reduce greenhouse gas or GHG emissions across the portfolio. This week, subject to the approval of council, we will enter into district government's first energy savings performance contract, which is a proven model by which DGS will cut district government building energy use with no to little upfront costs. These types of initiatives bring the district closer to Mayor Bowser's goals of carbon neutrality by 2040, improving long-term health outcomes for district residents, and saving money for district taxpayers. As introduced, the Solar Shade Expansion Amendment Act of 2025 would require the Department of Energy and the Environment, or DOEE, to conduct and publish a feasibility study identifying 20 sites, such as parks, sidewalks, bus shelters, bike lanes, and private properties, to install solar canopies in the district. The bill would authorize DOEE to issue grants to install solar canopies at 5 of the sites recommended by the feasibility study, and include the cost of solar canopies in the 2027 Capital Improvement Plan. Finally, this bill would require solar canopies be included in every capital project beginning in 2031. DGS fully supports carbon neutrality, including solar generation and energy efficiency across the district government portfolio. Reducing GHG emissions is part of our core mission. To that end, I want to convey DGS's support for the spirit of this legislation. However, we have some concerns about the language and impacts as introduced and suggestions for your consideration. To date, DGS has installed 17.16 megawatts of solar PV across the district government portfolio. Today, bids are coming in from solar developers to install, own, and maintain solar PV at an additional 27 district government sites. This will increase district government's on-site solar capacity by 1/3. DGS has conducted rolling feasibility studies on every district government property in its portfolio since 2013. These feasibility studies assess roof composition and remaining life, structural limitations, existing electrical system capabilities, utility feeder capacity, and minimal PV concept capacities. An additional and important metric for solar PV feasibility includes analysis of potential material changes to a site, such as a future modernization or disposal, that would impact the long-term operability of the proposed solar panels. Before adding a given site to an upcoming solar power purchase agreement or PPA, we coordinate internally with our portfolio and capital construction divisions to determine whether there is any likelihood that a property will not remain in the district government portfolio, as well as to determine if and when a property might undergo modernization, roof replacement, or other capital projects. Our approach prioritizes not just feasibility, but long-term viability, ensuring that our investments are sustainable, well-maintained, and beneficial to the communities that rely on these facilities. We install solar at no to little upfront costs through our PPA model. With PPAs, local solar solar developers design, install, own, and maintain solar energy systems at properties within the district government portfolio. District government, through DGS, agrees to buy the electricity at a discounted fixed rate for the life of the system, typically 15 to 20 years. Most recently, we have been receiving rates that equate to free electricity for 20 years for DCPS schools, recreation centers, and other facilities. This model not only saves taxpayer dollars, but it reduces district government's GHG emissions and supports local businesses. As mentioned previously, DGS has been conducting rolling solar feasibility studies on every district government property in its portfolio since 2013. DGS has installed or is actively constructing solar PV canopies at 8 sites. These sites were selected based on a number of factors, including past and future modernization plans, net zero energy candidacy, and limited or already maximized rooftop availability, egress for traffic and utilities, shifting needs of the community, public safety, and exposure to vandalism. DGS is already operating in the space of solar installations for DGS managed properties. As introduced, this bill would duplicate efforts by the Sustainability and Energy team and put them under another agency. Should a study be funded, there should be a distinction in the published solar feasibility study on whether sites are viable for isolated solar shade canopies independently of planned capital projects. The intended use of the solar energy is unclear in this bill. Removing planned capital project sites from consideration will ensure that this proposed legislation does not hinder efforts to achieve net zero energy for future projects or restrict the government's ability to include these sites in PPAs that reduce just district government energy costs for taxpayers. DGS also recommends a proposed legislation focus on conducting a feasibility study without mandating immediate solar canopy installation. Requiring solar installations as part of the capital improvement plan could divert capital resources away from other more impactful and quicker return on investment net zero energy ready features. Steel canopy structures are expensive, with their costs continuing to increase due to new tariffs. Investing in these structures rather than other sustainability features may not always yield the best return on investment in terms of GHG reductions or energy savings. The inclusion of solar shade canopies should be part of a broader community engagement effort to gain resident support and keep them informed throughout the construction process. As DPR sites are constantly evolving to fit the needs of the community, input from residents is essential for long-term planning and upkeep. Finally, while preventive maintenance costs are included in standard operating funds, district properties experience significant misuse and vandalism. This factor should be considered in a feasibility study for a solar canopy structure. I'd like to thank the committee for your time to share our perspective on the Solar Shade Expansion Amendment Act of 2025. We look forward to working with you to advance our shared goal of promoting viable and sustainable solutions to reduce district government energy costs and improve our environment. I am available to respond to any questions you may have.
Thank you very much. And Director Jackson.
Sure. Good morning, Chairperson Allen, members of the committee and staff. My name is Richard A. Jackson, Director of the Department of Energy and Environment, commonly referred to as DOEE. I'm here today to present testimony on behalf of the executive on 2 bills. Bravo 2665, the Solar Shade Expansion Amendment Act of 2025, and Bravo 2666, the Youth Advisory Council on Climate Change and Environmental Conservation Establishment Act of 2025. Concerning the Solar Shade Expansion Amendment Act of 2025, DOE supports the goal of the Solar Shade Expansion Amendment Act. Although we are very cognizant of the realities of our new financial environment, where the district's program costs are significantly outpacing its revenue growth, we are facing significant financial limitations in the FY26 budget. This means making difficult choices in what new programs we can afford and what programs we will need to reduce or eliminate entirely. DOE has been a leader in the district's efforts to combat the urban heat island effect and DOE leads the development of Keep Cool DC, the district strategy to reduce the drivers of extreme heat and protect residents from the dangers of high temperatures. That strategy calls for action that improve access to shade and cool spaces, and that ensure clean and reliable power, which are aligned with the goals of this bill. Shade structures that host solar panels have been deployed across the district to improve shade and provide more solar energy generation in the city, helping achieve two important goals in one step. One step. With a significant increase in the cost of electricity, there is increasing value in generating electricity locally for district residents through solar energy. District has over 200 megawatts of solar generation capacity currently, roughly the size of a medium-sized power plant. DOE is monitoring the potential impacts from tariffs, reductions to federal solar incentives, and other potential policy and legislative changes that cause uncertainty in the solar industry. We are mindful that these changes may have significant impacts on the district. We also know that the bill contains provisions that appear to dictate how the mayor's budget will need to be developed, particularly in mandating that solar shade sites be fully funded in the district's capital improvement plan. The executive has concerns that these provisions contradict the Home Rule Act's delineation of powers when it comes to the mayor's authority to prepare and submit a budget to the council. DOE looks forward to further discussions with the committee and stakeholders on this legislation. Concerning the Youth Advisory Council on Climate Change and Environmental Conservation Establishment Act of 2025, this legislation would establish a Youth Climate Council supported by DOE and aim at providing an organized youth perspective and role on climate action and resiliency efforts in the district. DOE supports the spirit and intent of this legislation. We agree that a Youth Climate Council would be an important step in ensuring that the city's approach to climate action and resiliency takes into account the perspectives and leadership of youth. Climate change in the district affects all of us, but especially youth who will live with the results of climate policies and actions that we take today. Youth have a powerful perspective and have been active in advancing climate and sustainability initiatives in their schools, communities, and with DOE. DOE has a dedicated history of engaging youth in climate issues, and supporting a Youth Climate Council would be a valuable addition. The agency has been engaged with youth stakeholders of various ages through workforce development and educational programs, such as the Green Fellows Program, the Green Zone Environmental Program, we finally call ZZEP, the annual Anacostia Environmental Youth Summit, the Meaningful Education Experience Classroom and Field Experience, and the Student Kingdom Rangers Program. In February 2022, the Commission on Climate Change and Resiliency, which I refer to as the Climate Commission, first expressed support for the idea of creating a Youth Climate Council. Prior to the introduction in 2024 of the previous version of the Youth Advisory Council on Climate Change and Environmental Conservation Establishment Act, DOE began a dialogue with the Climate Commission and conducted research on how to establish a modest Youth Climate Council within our existing capacity. This included conversations with Youth Climate Council coordinators from Tempe, Arizona, Boise, Idaho, and Portland, Oregon. Additionally, the Climate Commission hosted a knowledge forum in January of 2025 that included a youth panel with 6 students aged 14 to 25 to gather input on the potential role of youth in advising government on addressing climate change. As we continue to engage youth climate advocates in the district, DOE is also reviewing resources from the National Environmental Advisory Council, supported by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, as well as C40 City Youth Engagement Network. DOE appreciates the council's initiative to give young people a platform to educate and advocate for themselves and other youth in the district with regards to climate mitigation and adaptation. We would be happy to discuss with the committee our ideas for modifying the legislation to allow the Youth Climate Council to be more successful. Thanks for the opportunity to testify today, and I look forward to answering any questions.
Great. Thank you both very much. And I appreciate you both being here, because I think while a lot of people are going to look at DOEE predominantly and say, well, you're our agency that focuses just on energy, Ms. Croft, having DGS here is very helpful, because DGS obviously just managing our massive portfolio and all our buildings, as well as you talked about the power purchase agreements, plays a very important role in all of this. So I appreciate that both of you are here. To help kind of take a step back to Ms. Croft, could you just talk a little bit more about the division of responsibilities between DOEE and yourself as it relates to managing or promoting solar energy generation?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So the Department of General Services is responsible for installing solar PV on district government properties through the PPA model we mentioned before. DOEE installs solar through community solar, which provides discounted electricity to low-income subscribers.
Got it. So DGS is looking at the portfolio of buildings.
Mhm.
And can you talk more about, I think you mentioned in your testimony, kind of feasibility studies. So you're trying to evaluate that building for what? Appropriateness of rooftop solar in this example, or if a building's gonna be modernized in 5 years, perhaps not the best building to put rooftop solar on at this moment. Can you just talk a little bit more about how DGS evaluates the kind of feasibility of those types of investments?
Sure. So when we look at across the portfolio, back in 2013, we started looking at various sites to see if they're feasible for solar. And we continue to do so as buildings get modernized, if they're going to get a new roof, any like significant change. And we do that by, we sit near our capital construction division, continually speaking with them about their latest projects, what's going on. Even facilities sometimes does roof work that can make a site viable for solar. And then we also work closely with our portfolio division on whether or not there's any chance the site may leave the portfolio. They notify us when new sites enter the portfolio, and we go out, such as the former Eagle Academy, and take a look. Things we're looking for when we look for solar viability for roofs are we want it to be at least 20 years left of its roof life, which is pretty important because the solar panels will be on the roof for 20 years and it's very expensive to remove the panels. Other things we look at are the orientation of the building and how the sort of solar generation we'd get through helioscope models, which is a modeling software that estimates capacity and generation. We look at, there are a variety of different lenses we look at it through. We also look to see if there is a parking lot that could have solar canopies, as we've done at H.D. Woodson High School and Police Training Academy. You really want to scale those canopies to get the lowest PPA rate possible. So we look at accessibility. We also, our division manages waste hauling. So we want to make sure that the waste hauling trucks aren't blocked by canopies. So we look at where the loading dock is, and our waste team advises on, where the canopies should be and so forth.
Got it. Okay, thank you. I appreciate adding that context. So as you mentioned, we have the kind of an ongoing rolling feasibility studies that take place. And it sounds like you said that's been happening since 2013 or so. And if I understood the testimony, but correct me if I'm wrong, DGS has installed or is actively constructing 8 sites in that time. Is that the universe of our solar installation that's managed by DGS, or can you help add more context?
So we've installed solar at 64 to 67 sites, of which there are 8 solar canopies that some of which have either been installed or will be installed as this new bundle of sites.
Okay, got it. So the 8 you're speaking to are solar canopies. And how are we defining solar canopy for this? For example, is rooftop solar that's putting shade on the roof, are you calling that a solar canopy, or your solar canopy is separate from rooftop?
It's everything that is separate from the roof and that is not on directly on the ground as a ground mount.
Got it. Okay, thank you. And you mentioned also, I think you said 17 megawatts or so. Were you saying that the 8 sites generate that, or were you talking about the totality of the portfolio of the 64-ish?
Sure, that's the current total of the portfolio, 17 megawatts.
Is the 64 or so sites?
Yes.
Got it. Okay, thanks. I do think obviously solar projects can be complicated and they can be expensive. And as you pointed out, you want to get a quantity that help you manage your costs, right? When we think about, how does DGS evaluate, often across government, we're looking at it from each of our distinct perspectives, right, from different agencies.
Mhm.
What I'm trying to get at here is, how does DGS evaluate this is a project worth doing or this is a project not worth doing? Is it predominantly a cost decision of this is going to be the right return on investment in this? I'm careful, like I'm not being negative about any of those perspectives, just recognizing each agency has its own responsibility for kind of what it's looking at. Is that accurate to say DGS is kind of looking at it more from a, does this make sense on a cost perspective?
Sure, there are multiple perspective. I would say we start with the technical first. Like, does it make sense to install solar here from a technical perspective? We prefer to install systems that are at least 40 kW. So like a row house rooftop might be like 10 to 15 kW, if that gives you some perspective. Once we've like assessed whether these are actually technically viable sites, that's when we start to reach out to portfolio and capital construction to see, hey, is anything going to be happening at the site that we're not aware of? Is it staying in the portfolio for 20 years? That sort of thing. And then we reach out to the client agencies that are occupying these buildings to talk about the solar with them. And we've, for the most part, they've been very receptive. I would only say for canopies is the most challenging type of solar to install because we're in a dense urban environment. And when you, for instance, in parking, if you put a parking canopy, then that client agency is going to lose part of its parking for a period of time while the structures are being built. So it's really important to have that really close engagement with the client agency so they know what to expect and you can coordinate around their operations.
Yeah, obviously the coordination is important. I guess what I'm struck by is that if we started this in 2013, so about 12 years or so, we've only identified about 8 sites for solar canopies. That, I mean, I feel like I could walk around just my own neighborhood and spot 8 locations where solar canopies would probably make a whole lot of sense. Perhaps not from the dollars and cents perspective, right? Like, and again, that's part of DGS's evaluation, but in terms of the public's utility of a public space could make a big difference. Seems like over 12 years, we'd be able to find enough solar canopy sites that you could also do something at scale where you are bundling a large number of projects together to help make it much more affordable. Is this just, has the solar canopy idea just not been as much a priority as a solar roof prioritization and concept?
Sure, we prioritize roofs because we can get the best kWh rate, the electricity rate. And yes, you can put a canopy over many places, but at the end of the day, it's like, does it make sense financially or for what you're trying to achieve? So for instance, yeah, you could put a canopy over a playground because maybe, and as a parent of two kids, I completely understand the desire for shade. I want that too. But it may be less expensive and may make more sense to install, or I should say, plant trees near that playground. Because then in the trees, you get that shade in the summer when the sun is really beaming down. But when the trees, if they're deciduous, lose their leaves in the winter, and you're getting like a fair amount of sun in the winter. So just from a cost perspective, from a kind of what I think as a parent, a shade perspective, there are other ways to achieve that shade. And then from the cost perspective, I mean, the cost is real. Like Banneker High School, we installed solar canopies over the parking lot and over some bleachers. Back then, the cost of the actual structures themselves was about $800,000. Today, with the way steel prices are, that could be $2 to $3 million. So we don't want to take money away from the capital budgets that could be used toward other sustainability features, like insulation, like enhanced commissioning, like geothermal, which, you know, we're very much so efficiency first, and we really want to make sure that building is maximizing its performance on the efficiency side before we pull money out of that budget for canopies.
Yeah, I want to make sure I'm very clear when we talk about like a school modernization, because this gets thrown out in hearings all the time when someone's proposing an idea. No one is suggesting that we're going to put less money into our schools. It's about when we're planning for a school, how do we build in the cost so that we add the money to the project such that if there's a cost associated with a solar canopy, that's built into, not subtracted from the overall cost of a project. Let me go to the playgrounds for a second, because I appreciate we got testimony submitted from DPR, who also noted DPR prioritizes planting trees over installing shade structures. So it's not a priority to build shade, apparently. If we plant a new tree, I have 2 little kids too, when we're grandparents, maybe that tree is tall enough to provide some shade on the playground, but we continue to build playgrounds without any shade structures. And so be it a solar shade or just a piece of fabric that could create shade, we don't do it. And if our stated policy is we're going to prioritize planting trees, I love my trees. I want to continue to build our tree canopy, but that's not going to actually help my kid not burn themselves on the slide for about 40 more years until that tree gets mature enough. So I don't understand why we aren't prioritizing shade more.
I don't want to speak for the decisions that are made for our client agencies with shade, and I agree, I would love more shade. But I will say that sometimes those solar shade structures, if they're to be year-round, can be expensive. So I'm imagining they may get value engineered out of some projects. If someone's actually going to be taking down those shade structures, they're a lot less expensive. But in my brief stint at Creating Hardy Outdoor Classroom, these are some of the takeaways that I learned.
I noted, I think in your testimony and Director Freeman's as well, in a written testimony, talked about, the risk of vandalism. And I do agree the safest structure is the one we never build. So if we never build it, it'll never get vandalized. I also don't think that's the right way we should be trying to approach it. Obviously, none of us want to see something vandalized. When we put an investment in, we want to take good care of it. We want the public to take good care of it. And there's probably some smart engineering ways we can make it so that it is less likely to be damaged. But I know on my own kids' playground at school, they have a shade sail that was built, and it's been there for years and years and years, and it's held up. It's a piece of fabric. It can't cost that much money. So I feel like that it is not a priority very often when we're doing this. Help me also understand from a PPA perspective, because I hear you. You go to the purchasing agreement, and especially if you can get the quantity, you're able to help get a savings back and create the electricity and the energy. Why do we not, if we have enough to scale, why do we not want to pursue something where we own it ourselves, we own the system ourselves, we're able to use and offset SRECs ourselves? Is it just financially not sustainable to pursue that type of approach? And or is it functionally just easier to partner privately to have and go into a PPA?
Yeah, the beauty of the PPA system are how the incentives are aligned. So because that system owner has a responsibility for repair, replacement, operations, and maintenance, they're going to design, build, and maintain that system to the best possible way feasible. There's no after a year or two, the warranty goes away, nothing like that. They are responsible for the performance of the system. There would be a slight potential financial increase from owning the system, but we have to weigh the risks of that small increase to having to do, now we're doing specialized solar operations and maintenance for 20 years. I will say we really learned that lesson with our first large bundle when the solar panel inverters stopped working and the solar panel inverter company went out of business. So instead of DC government having to bear that financial burden, which was quite significant, the solar system owner on the PPA side, they are the ones that had to bear that burden. So that just reinforced for us why it makes sense to go with the PPA model.
Okay, so there's an element from DGS's perspective as you're evaluating cost, energy production, risk mitigation or
Yes.
liability costs would be one of the factors you're considering?
Right.
Okay.
Yes. Mhm.
Got it. Okay. Is there anything in upcoming energy savings performance contracts that are going to change DGS's current practice on PPAs? Or this is the practice you anticipate moving forward with?
Sure. We would like to add some roofs to the ESPC so that the ESCO, the ESPC contractor, can take advantage of the solar, and we can use those savings toward other like longer payback energy conservation measures. But yeah, we anticipate continuing the PPA model.
Okay. If I look at a different model here in the district, though, if I look at the Oxen Run solar array, that's one that we own, correct? The district?
That's correct.
Okay. So what does that look like from a maintenance perspective? Is it an outlier within our solar and that we own that?
It is an outlier,
Okay.
yes. Yeah, so our team operates and maintains that through our solar consultant, Lightbox. I will say, like, yeah, even that site has had some issues with its inverters and so forth that can be quite expensive. But it was, when DOE and DGS decided on that, to put solar on that brownfield, the two agencies decided on the ownership model.
Okay. What is where's the revenue generated from that energy creation go?
It goes to the low-income community solar subscribers.
Okay. And the maintenance costs are borne by DGS or DOE?
Currently DGS.
DGS, okay. And so the energy, the revenue generated by energy, and then sale of the SRECs, all that's plugged back into the low-income energy credits?
So just the electricity goes to the low-income subscribers.
Okay.
DGS has been selling the SRECs lately to help with our overall district government energy costs.
Okay. So that mean the sale of those SRECs are going back into DGS or the general fund?
No, they're going back into our electricity billing rate for our supply rate for district government.
Got it. Okay. All right, Director Jackson, in your testimony, the district has over 200 megawatts of solar generation capacity. Does this figure incorporate solar systems that are not part of the PPAs that are managed by DGS? Is it the same or is that separate?
Sure. So with me today, of course, about Nick Berger, my Deputy Director for Energy Administration, and Dr. DiLorenzo, who does our Urban Sustainability Group, so they can provide you the best answers. So I will let Nick take the answer concerning that one.
Thanks.
Sure. Thanks, Director. Yeah, of the 200 plus megawatts in the district, about 42 of that last time we counted are projects that came to fruition through the Solar for All program. Most of that is community solar, about 36 megawatts. The 5 to 6 are small rooftop solar projects that we fund and pay for through the DCSEU on residence houses.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
Yep. Okay. All right. Thanks. All right. So if I'm looking at the bill and the legislation, so it lays out 3 different categories of property the district could consider when identifying potential sites for solar canopies. One would be buildings and land owned by the district, such as our rec centers, parks, pools, parking structures. Second would be roadways, sidewalks, bike lanes managed by DDOT. And the third would be private property, including residential commercial buildings. I don't know to what extent you've looked at other cities or countries around the world that have looked at this type of concept. I think we've seen, and since we introduced this bill, we had people kind of highlight different experiences that they've seen in other places. I do agree that there's a certain amount, you have to have some scale to make it work. So it would be from the cost of the steel to all the different pieces. If you were to put up just one panel on a playground, that's not the scale that really works. You're not producing much energy. You might produce some shade, but if shade is my goal, that might be best suited by a solar sail, like a shade sail. But there are some sites where we're going to have enough space or we can get to scale. We've seen it on Riverwalk trails. We've seen it in other places in other parts of the world. Has DOE looked at some of those models or explored whether or not the scale of some of those sites could get to have the math?
So we've not formally looked at any of those models. We've seen probably some of the same news reporting that sounds like you've seen around interesting projects where people have blanketed, bike paths with solar. And I think we found those pretty intriguing, but we haven't actually looked at them numerically, financially, from a benefits cost perspective. So no, not formally.
Okay.
One thing I will add to that is, totally agree. It's about the accumulation, right? If you could, one may give you X, but if I do 10 of that, that was 10X. Is 10X good enough? Don't know, but that's something where not being restricted to a singular, but you're looking at it holistically, always makes a difference that could be not necessarily significant, but make it worth doing it in terms of the risk balance between shade, in this case, risk balance between shade and actually a return or break even for solar. That accumulative effect should be something that should be considered, because sometimes, as you eat the elephant one bite at a time, it will go away, right? Same effect here. If you have multiple not parking, but bench structures that have it, the driver is shade, but that little bit that it would take to just modify that particular piece may be there, and it should be explored. So I totally agree with that.
Okay. The legislation would require the district to identify locations that could support at least 500 square feet of solar panels. The idea behind that requirement, again, was strike the balance between finding locations where we can install canopies at scale without a square footage requirement that's too limiting. We don't want to have to redo, like if we're trying to manage our costs, we don't want to necessarily have to redo all the electrical work, overcome a lot of grid interconnection issues for a single panel here or there. At the same time, 500 square feet of panels, it's better than nothing. Do you have any feedback on where we landed around a size or a scope? Is 500 square feet too big, too little, way off the mark? Any feedback around that specifics or specificity of 500 square feet?
We've thought about this some. I do think that's probably about as small as you'd want to consider, given the type of project we're talking about. We're talking about, government project. I mean, Ms. Croft kind of alluded to this earlier that, as she said, a typical row house project is going to be plus or minus 10 kW. That's a good size solar system on a roof. That's about 500 square feet. Depends on the panel, depends on the configuration. But so 500 square feet would be the size you would take up, the amount of space you would take up to build like a rooftop solar installation. That probably is going to be, I would defer to the DGS team on this from their like design and construction perspective, but that's probably going to be the lower end of what might be feasible on an individual basis. Now, again, I think we'd want to, as the director suggests, kind of look at, could that be a bundled approach? I think we'd also probably want to look at what are the types of spaces that would most benefit from shade and what are the sizes of those spaces. A pool deck has come up, right? How much space would we need? I think about the splash pad by my house, So I guess I would say that number seems reasonable as a place to start. I think if a study was going to go forward, that would probably be something to look at, is like, what does the financial viability and the project viability look like at varying sizes?
Okay. Got it. Are there any, again, I appreciate both DOE and DGS being here. When we think about the scope and scale of these sort of projects, are there any other of our district agencies that should be a part of this conversation? Or do I have the right two ones here? Again, DPR submitted testimony. They seem like they're a logical connection here, and I appreciate Director Freeman putting in some testimony. Are there any other sister agencies you can think of that we should be checking in with about this?
I would suggest DC Public Libraries possibly, because they build and maintain their own facilities. DGS manages their utility payments, but they have their own, they have their own DGS per se.
Yeah, fair point. Okay. Let me just move for a moment to our Youth Advisory Council. Bill as well, you were here, so you heard a lot of the testimony. I think we heard a lot of support for it, but also some suggestions on ways to fine tune it. I think one suggestion we had from one of our commissioners, for example, was to be more explicit about linking it to things like Climate Ready DC, Sustainable DC 2.0, trying to get that youth council to be very clear that we want their input on this. You know, I don't want to create something that's name and only. I want it to have legitimacy, let it have agency. Director Jackson, I know you were reading off your prepared testimony just now that you had a chance to hear some of the testimony. Anything you wanted to reflect on from some of the testimony and conversation you heard as well?
Sure. I mean, I was taking, took some notes. So yeah, enjoyed the testimony of all the witnesses. As you said, the statement about youth lead government support, like that statement. So that was that kind of summed up the whole deal in terms of what you're after. I like the conversation about, like you said, keeping it kind of flexible so that they can grow. But when it got to the age, so I was torn as well in terms of high school, absolutely. I guess it would be the matter of that balance between high school and college. Like, would there be a unintentionally having the college overshadow the high school? And so, and then if you had middle school, same thing. So kind of where, so where's that sweet spot? The idea about a shadow or bringing, mid-schoolers in to shadow and learn, I think was an idea to consider. I think the gentleman that spoke about, Mr. Quinn Jacobs, that spoke about the training and workshops, yeah, that could definitely be a part of it in terms of teaching them how it works so that they're not just speaking in such a way, but not understanding how the process is. So those were, and I got a bunch more, I can keep going, but those are the main ones that I got. I think one thing that I took away from it that I think would have to be a part of it is, I always speak about, when it comes to the climate, it's a marathon, not a sprint. And so as I listen to them talk about where we're at, and then I look back and I reflect back, like I always try to put myself in the other person's shoe. So I look back to in the 70s when I was a kid and what everything looked like in the 70s versus how we got 50 years later, here we are. And so when you look at it, to me, when you look at it that way, that took time to get from the 70s to the 2020s. And so, yes, there's urgency, but at the same time, you can't neglect the progress that has been made over the course of those 50 years. So to look at what the progress could be in the next 50 years is where the vision needs to be at. But the past cannot be forgotten, or where it came from or where it started from to where we're at today can't be forgotten. And so part of what that committee would do to me, or should do, is understanding where we came from to get to here versus just starting from here saying, things aren't happening fast enough. Okay, take a second step back, understand how much progress we've made and appreciate that progress, and then continue to move forward. But move forward with that kind of sense of accomplishment. And so now I'm standing on those shoulders in order to move further. And so, definitely would like to have that to be a part of it. But I think the hunger and the focus that was presented in the testimonies this morning was very good to see, and I appreciated that.
Yeah, well, I appreciate your thoughts on that, and I think there's a lot there, and I definitely like the youth-led, government-supported kind of comments we heard, and certainly, like a lot of things, I don't ever want people to kind of forget the progress that has been made, but I also know that power only yields to pressure and demand. So it's a healthy thing for those youth voices to push with urgency and high expectations. So I kind of envision this, we're talking about the government supported part. So DOE already supports our Commission on Climate Change and Resiliency. So in essence, does anything change from a DOE perspective, or you would expect that kind of partnership would be continued in the same way it is with the commission on climate change?
So I'm gonna let Dr. Lily Lorenzo, who heads up the group that oversees the
Mhm.
Climate Commission, and I know she's put a lot of thought into this as well, so I think it would be good to hear her perspective on this.
Thank you, Director. Thank you, Councilmember. So we've had a lot of wonderful conversations with your staff, with youth, and I think there's very little that all of us can add to the eloquence that we've already heard from the youth today and previously. We would continue. We did take Commissioner Holman's suggestion to heart that there be a formal linkage between the Commission on Climate Change and Resiliency and a Youth Climate Council. And we do it, you're right. As you may recall, we did begin the Commission on Climate Change and Resiliency without staffing. And we found that to be challenging, as did the commission. And as you know, staffing was added over time. So there's a lesson learned there, I think, in terms of capacity needed to ensure success. And of course, working with youth, there are a number of different models. It was great to hear from the commissioner from LA today. That's a really different model. That's largely college age. They are a lot of even graduate students, some of them. So they are significantly older in many instances. As the commissioner mentioned today, they made that decision to recruit persons who are over 18 so that they could be paid. And we do understand that it is fairly significant, the payment that they receive. So, and you can look at different cities around the world, which we have begun doing also with your staff persons. And I think we would want to be, as we've all referenced a few times, really youth-led and government-supported to say what fits for Washington, D.C. And, some of the things we've thought about is that the LA, that commission represents the whole county, not just the city. So it's not over 9 million people. So you're thinking about a ratio of 25 commissioners representing 9 million people. And thinking about what's the staffing that's needed, what's the expertise, how active are they? So some of the amazing youth that we've worked with here, some of them said we would want to meet weekly. So I think what we're thinking about is how do we maximize the resources to optimize them for success, whatever that looks like. And we would be committed to working with you to refine that in a way that does maximize and harness their passion for this urgent work that they feel called to do.
Yeah. Thank you. I do think we've landed, having the staffing and some direct support for the commission has been, I think, very meaningful to their work and their ability to put something forward. And one of the things I think about too is within the way we structure the proposal was that youth would be serving 2-year terms, and some of that's recognizing don't do a term longer than that, because if I'm talking about a young person, if they're in college and university, they may be graduating within the middle of that term, or high school, they may be graduating. I do want to spend some time kind of thinking about how do we bring in, I think there are some very important and powerful middle school voices that could be a big part of this. Initially, our ratio was 3 middle school, 3 high school, 3 college, university. Perhaps we change up the ratio a little bit where we're a little heavier on high school. And we heard some good feedback about ways to make sure we actually aren't unintentionally shrinking the pool of eligible college and university students. So we've got some good ideas to make some changes there. And then as we heard Commissioner Holman talk about, maybe the middle school are junior commissioners. So there's a way that they are gaining expertise and relationships in that mentoring capacity. And then at high school, college is when you're actually the full member of the commission. So we're going to kind of wrestle with that a little bit. I don't want to cut middle school voices out of it, though. So I want to try to think about how to get that right, because I think we have some very impressive, I know everyone here agrees, some very impressive middle school voices that in a year or two, they're that high school student who's leading the charge too. So we want to build and empower that and grow that. So, okay. I think that's all the questions I've got right now. When we think about DOE, my expectation would be, unless you tell me that it'd be different, in the same way you support the commission, DOE is able to help support with relevant data, supports, expertise. We kind of talked about the training. I'm on track with that. And just in case the camera's not nodding, you're nodding yes.
Yes, I am nodding yes. Thank you.
All right.
I'll just add that, that FTE.
No, wait a minute. Now you're starting to add FTEs because
So we have one
the
for
executive loves to add 2 FTEs to everything.
well, one. One,
All right.
one for one, one for the
Mhm.
other one. I'm
Mhm.
good with that. I'm good with that.
So you're saying you need a new FTE just for this?
For me, I'm always looking for when a new program comes, a new FTE, but,
What-
again, further
I
discussion.
thought we were about efficiencies and maybe working hard to find people that are able to do
Wrong
two different
group, even
things.
though I did get a couple of letters from that group, because of the initials, but wrong group.
I have confidence we can figure this out. This is
Absolutely, we can figure it out.
all right. All right. That's what I like to hear. All right. I want to thank everybody on the panel for your testimony and your time today. I appreciate that. And I know that if we have additional follow-ups, we can reach out and follow up after the hearing too. So I want to say this concludes the committee's public hearing on Bill 26-65, the Solar Shade Expansion Amendment Act of 2025, and Bill 26-66, the Youth Advisory Council on Climate Change and Environmental Conservation Establishment Act of 2025. Again, I want to thank all of our witnesses for their testimony, including our impressive youth advocates. The record for today's public hearing is going to close on Monday, April 14th. And so you can submit written testimony to us through the council's hearing management system at lims.dccouncil.gov/hearings. Until then, there being no further business for the committee, the time is now 3:07 p.m. and this public hearing of the Committee on Transportation and the Environment